Donna, you happen to know Walter de Maria, right?
Yes.
So he had a great sense of humor.
Absolutely.
And do we find it here?
I think you find it in many of the early drawings where you really see a playfulness in his work. And in the early sculptures that he made, there's one called Ball Drop, a wooden box, and it's meant for somebody to take a ball and drop it in the top of the box, and then it makes a sound when it gets to the bottom. So there's, they're participatory, at least at that time they were. And there's a lot of sense of games and, and play, I think, in the work, and humor, along with the seriousness. The thing about de Maria that's, I think, so fascinating is he's so precise in the mathematical configurations.
He was a mathematician, a way?
No, I think he just really was very engaged with ideas of, coming out of minimalism and, thinking about those kinds of systems that were very rigorous. But people misunderstand, I think, and see him only as a minimalist, but he's sort of a conceptual artist. And then, of course, his engagement with land art. But I think there's a sense of games.
Yeah, because when you look at that and when you think that he comes from minimalism, it's difficult to imagine his sense of humor.
Yes.
So where can we see the humor in this truck, for example?
I think in some of the drawings that
But not here.
The drawings upstairs.
No, but not in this installation.
I think that these cars or the trucks have a kind of, for me, like almost a cartoonish kind of character. Like if you look and you stand in front of the car and you look at the front, it has a kind of face almost to it. So there's something about that. But it's embedded in the work. But that's why it's important to look at some of the earlier work, because as time goes on, it's less and less apparent. But there is, and particularly like the open polygon piece, the ones that are on the floor with the ball that is within them, they link back to these early works that he made where you would participate. They were games. You would put a ball in things. You would have a rope that you could pull in a box. So, there's a sort of line, but it becomes less and less apparent. He was, he didn't really show some of this work.
But this is a monument to car industry, no?
Well, there's no doubt, he grew up in Los Angeles, so the car is big, and it's definitely the United States. And there's a series of drawings I've included from the 60s that have cars. So I think there's also, the young boy's fascination with cars.
Until now.
Yeah, absolutely, and this kind of precision and restoration of a car. There's definitely that component.
Because it's interesting, most of the time we think about minimalism as something very cold.
Yes.
And this is not so cold after all.
Well, that's why I think he's, was he a minimalist? Was he a conceptual artist? He gets put within one camp. But I think his work is more than that. And I think it's interesting because, we always like to sort of categorize artists, but he's completely different than someone like Donald Judd, for instance. So, first of all, that you've got a representational image, which you would never see in something like Judd, right? So you already have a reference point here that's very different.
But you have the monumentality.
Absolutely, yes. And the rods that are in, that have all the geometric forms. The other thing I find particularly interesting about the trucks, because there's a series of cars from the 50s, the Bel Air trilogy that's in the Prada collection. And, that's a kind of incredible, very slick, very different. But, this would have been the kind of vehicle he would have been driving in when he went into the desert. So I don't know if that's how he thought about it, but to me, there's a kind of reference point in that. Of course, these are not beat up, they're pristine, they're amazing, and they're just kind of amazing sculpture. And, he removed...
Because there's no engine in it.
Pardon me?
No engine.
No engine. He also removed the windshield wipers. He took off the mirrors. So he kind of stripped them down so that, you know, the form itself, of course, is seen as sculpture. It's a sculptural form. So, you know, at his heart, he's a sculptor. And I think also the way they occupy the space, because they really are obviously very require this kind of space, energize the space. And that's why it's great to see some of the other examples, you know, where you say the sense of the infinite. You know, he's always alluding to something that we can't see, or the invisible drawings that you have to get very close. So, you know, this idea of the sublime, of what we can see, what we can't see, is, you know, very much a part of his work. And of course, you know, one of the great works is The Lightning Field, you know, which is such an extraordinary experience and a very sublime, almost spiritual experience.
Merci.
My pleasure.